Right, it looks like we're live. Hi there, and welcome to our next In Conversation webinar with us. We're chatting about how YFM in Joburg got 1 million entries in 2 weeks and what the station did differently during lockdown to cater to its youth market, particularly over that period. Joining me today is Hilton Tarrant. He's the man on the screen with me. The head of digital at YFM, where he drives the station's digital strategy and works alongside the sales, programming, and marketing teams to deliver a truly integrated approach to everything the station does. Increasingly, his focus has been working with the station's creative solutions team, agencies, and clients to ensure that campaign results constantly outperform those on other stations and in other mediums. I know that means that he basically does everything. It's good to have you on board. Thank you, Hilton, for joining us today. Thank you for your time.
Good morning.
I'm Jonathan Lumley, head of the clients, channels, and markets here at Media. And to give you some context, YFM do use a product that we developed called Fabric. It's a suite of digital tools, and one part of that is the app that YFM utilizes. They obviously use various other parts of Fabric, but today's conversation really focuses on the engagement aspect of that. Since March, radio programming in South Africa has been dominated by all things COVID. We've done several webinars on this over the last few weeks, and it really has dominated everything as it has in the rest of our lives. But from daily statistics and government's ongoing response to features on how to integrate precautionary measures to our everyday lives, broadcasting platforms pivoted rapidly to offering their audiences relevant information, leading to solid growth in audience figures. However, YFM's approach was a little bit different, and that's why we have Hilton on the webinar today. Fully in tune with what their audience wanted, the station went all out with their 100 racks promotion with staggering and insightful results. That's why Hilton is here today. Head of YFM's digital will take through everything part of the campaign and why it was so successful. So let's be clear, this isn't the first time they've run it. They did run it last year with the start of lockdown at the end of March. And again, it was end of last year, and then also March, April this year, and again in June. And that's created a huge response from their audience. And of course, if you have any questions, you're welcome to post them in the chat on your screen on the right-hand side, and we'll tackle those afterwards. I also have a few questions for Hilton around the promotion and the audience engagement. So really over to you, Hilton. It's always the fun part of the webinar where you have to kind of share the screen and get your presentation on there, and we just all hold our breath.
There we go.
Excellent.
We go there. And there we go.
Excellent. We can see it there. Thanks,
Great.
Hilton. Over to you.
Cool. So I think, importantly at the start, we really have to answer the question, why do this at all? So 100 racks, for those of you who don't know what racks means, it's slang for money or cash. 100 racks really referring to the 100,000 Rand that YFM was going to give away and did give away. Obviously, a campaign like this would be a TSL builder, so to drive that time spent listening, to drive engagement with the station, and that would obviously come through in kind of your RAM data down the line, as well as in your streaming data. But why else do a campaign like this? And that really forced us to do some introspection and to do some collaboration across the station. So all the way from marketing, from programming, creative solutions, sales, research, to really kind of grapple with this and to kind of find ways of achieving other outcomes besides simply driving time spent listening, and besides obviously rewarding our audience. And as Jonathan said, we really started this journey last year already with a campaign that we ran in August of 2019. Back then it was called 992 racks. Obviously the station's frequency is 99.2. So we gave away a total of 99,200 Rand at the start of August. And at that point in time, that campaign was limited to our drive time show, The Best Drive with DJ Sabby. We ran that for about 10 days in August. And really the intent there was to get our audience familiar with how a campaign like this works. These are bread and butter things for adult contemporary stations, but YFM hasn't really done a campaign like this for some time. So it was very important for us to kind of get our audience familiar with that, and also to get our talent familiar with how these executions work, and to trial different executions.
Mode, essentially.
Cool. So just like that. Okay,
That's
great. So yeah, as I was saying, important for us to get our audience familiar with how a campaign like this works, and to trial different ways of executing. As I said, this ran just on the drive show for a period of about 10 days, and we gave away a different amount of money every hour, which totaled that 99,200 Rand. We were going to do it in kind of November, December, but we actually we were in the fortunate position, I think, of a lot of other campaign activity running on the station, and decided not to try and crowd out those client campaigns. Just before lockdown, so in the week leading up to lockdown, the last week of March, we elected to run it again. And I mean, if you cast your mind back to the kind of feeling and the mood in the country, in the province, in Joburg at that point in time, it was a mood where there was a fair amount of anxiety, a fair amount of fear of the unknown. But we still decided to go ahead and to run the campaign, and for a number of different reasons. I think, firstly, to educate our audience about the app, knowing that the hard lockdown would force a fundamental shift in consumption, and then also to derive insights from that audience. And I'll touch on that a little bit more. And then, I mean, the results that we'll be talking about today and sharing are certainly from, obviously, the campaign that we ran in June, given that it was Youth Month. We're a youth station, very important for us to obviously be active in that month. So the strategy, as I said, was really around education. It was around informing our audience and really educating them around not only the download size of the actual app, so the actual amount of megabytes that you'd be using to download the app, so that we were with you throughout lockdown, but also on the streaming efficiency side. So both of those are kind of in the tens of megabytes. We're not going to hundreds of megabytes. And from an audio streaming point of view, obviously it was important for us to do that education drive in a very natural and seamless way as we headed into lockdown. As I said, we knew that listening habits would change fundamentally, and it was important for us to take our most engaged audience and to build the size of that most engaged audience, the listeners who would download the app and obviously put that on their home screen of their iPhone or their Android device, and to grow the size of that audience and to take that audience into lockdown with us. The second reason for running the campaign in the way that we did in March was to derive certain insights, demographic insights and usage insights. And I'm not talking about kind of never-ending creepy surveys that we'd ask listeners to fill in. It was rather about us catching up to where the Fabric platform had gotten to, given that we were one of the earliest adopters of the platform. We were obviously fortunate in a lot of respects, but we hadn't built out the full kind of user profiling capability, which at that stage was available and has been for some time. So it really allowed us to kind of catch up to what was available from a feature set in the app, and to get additional insights from those listeners on an opt-in basis. So once they downloaded the app, they would then obviously register. And there was a strong incentive in the 100 Racks campaign that we ran in March for the listeners to obviously download the app, to register, and to enter the competition. If they had registered and told us more about themselves, we would double up the money that they won, their prize money. If they had just registered or had previously registered and hadn't updated their details, they would just get the kind of stock standard base prize money. So those insights that we managed to derive from that week-long period where the campaign ran are really powerful, because as many people on this session would know, the BRC RAM data has certain limitations in a city region, as Gauteng likes to call itself. Those challenges are particularly acute. It's very difficult to see, for example, where your audience moves, especially, or exists. It's a very fluid environment. And certainly the insights that we got allowed us to have a better handle of where our audience was, in Joburg North, in the East Rand, in Soweto, in places where, our audience had obviously traditionally been strong, and you could see some of that in the RAM data, but to get, that additional level of insight. So that really was the strategy going into lockdown. And we saw that, we saw the benefits of that going, throughout the hard lockdown and in the past couple of months, and that the size of the engaged base grew because of the 100 racks promotion that we ran into lockdown. And we did a number of programming initiatives and digital initiatives through lockdown that ensured that base remained engaged, and we've reset the size of that base. So before lockdown we would have had X, and we've obviously increased that substantially since then. So in terms of insights from the 100 Racks campaign, specifically the one that ran in June, very importantly, this had to be a campaign with a very simple mechanic. We gave away 100,000 Rand, a total of 100,000 Rand across this time a 2-week period. So, the first campaign, rewinding to August last year, was about 10 days. The campaign that we ran into lockdown was a single week, and the one in June ran across 2 weeks. Obviously, that allowed us to benchmark the weeks against each other, but then obviously also benchmark that backwards against what we saw and what we learned in March. We gave a unique keyword away per show, and because of the continued anxiety in the market and uncertainty, these are tough times. The overarching theme of the 100 Racks campaign in June was one of positivity, of looking forward, of hope. And it was very important for us to pick keywords and to pick a message and to drive home a message amongst our audience and our listeners of positivity. So a unique keyword per show that ran from Y mornings in the morning at 5 a.m. all the way through to Anati's Nights on Y, which ends at 10 p.m. at night. So 5 shows a day across the week, with the exception of Friday night. And that ran for 2 weeks. So there were 48 unique opportunities to win. We gave a flat 2,000 Rand cash prize in each show. The entry mechanic, very simple, as I said, and the mechanism was through the YFM app. You simply had to register so that you could message the station and send in that keyword when you heard it. What was very interesting again was the different executions between the shows. So we played around with that a lot with talent. Would you give away the keyword at only one moment in the show? Would you tease it throughout the show and give it away quite close to the final, in that final hour? Would you give it away in almost every link? And we did a number of those variations across the 2-week period. Again, if we go back and look at the 3 different campaigns that we ran, the original one allowed you to enter anywhere on social as well as the YFM app. The one that we ran heading into lockdown was the YFM app only, but with that strong registration and tell us more about yourself component. And then this one, presuming that, that core engaged base had already told us about them, this was simply around messaging the station. On to results. So from the campaign, we did receive over 1.1 million entries through the 2-week period. And importantly, from an audio streaming point of view, depending on different metrics, whether we're looking at peaks or uniques and those kind of things, over 100% increase in audio streaming. So, effectively doubled. From an app usage point of view, very importantly that we saw a significant uplift off that high lockdown base that I spoke about. And that was important because we'd built such a solid base through April and through May. It was important for us to push on and to drive that even harder. And from a monthly app download point of view, so across the Google Play Store and the iOS App Store, effectively 100% increase. So whatever that figure was running at previously, a 2x a figure in June. And importantly, that's almost repeatable. So, I mean, if we rewind to the learnings from March, we saw very similar numbers in terms of the increases. So in terms of app downloads, if you go back to March, there was also 100% increase on what that base was. And we saw that repeated in June. So that seems to be quite repeatable. That chart there, you can see, I mean, in terms of unique listeners streaming per day, you can see the difference, significantly higher. And I think what was also important is that we started retaining listeners throughout the day, as you would expect in a TSL builder. And we could see that from the audio streaming data. So the live streaming data that the platform provides aggregates that data from the YFM app, from the website, as well as from third-party aggregators where we've made our stream available. And importantly, you could see that there was a structural shift there, albeit temporary for the 2 weeks, where listeners would be listening through Y Mornings, through Crunch with Kutso, through the Shakedown, which is the lunchtime show, into the Best Drive, and then it would taper off into the evening. So results speak for themselves. We also saw increased engagement across our social platforms. So obviously there was a social component for this, which was really around driving awareness and also announcing winners and making, tying back that loop, closing the loop, and making sure that the campaign was a little bit more human. So you could see that there was a meaningful result when it came to giving away this money. And then obviously it drove higher time spent listening. And we could see that certainly from the streaming data, which we believe is a very, very good proxy for on-air listening as well. Thanks, John. I think that is pretty much what we're sharing.
Fascinating. It really is. So I've got a couple of questions just around it from some of the stuff that you've chatted to us there from the slides, and thanks very much for sharing.
Sure.
You're saying about the strategy and downloading the app was obviously one objective, and then obviously highlighting the streaming efficiency. So we get asked this all the time, and I'm sure you do too, and I'm sure there's a lot of agencies, and I know in my previous life with radio as well, data sensitivity around your audience. How data sensitive are the audience? Are they at all? And how did you go about really defining how big the app was in terms of a download? I mean, do they understand that type of thing? There's a lot of questions here, but also the streaming efficiency of it. Do you get any complaints from people going, but it chows all my data? And how do you deal with that type of thing?
So I think we'll start. I'll start with your last question first. Certainly, we do kind of get those comments where a listener will download the app, will stream, and will be doing a bunch of other stuff on their phone without realizing it. And then we'll get the feedback that, the YFM app, for example, charged all my data. I had 500 megabytes loaded. And that really is a kind of community management process where we've got a team, our social team will then reach out and work with that listener to get them to a point to where they understand that it wasn't necessarily the case and they'd done a bunch of other stuff, which maybe charred all their data. And that is important, instead of those comments just kind of going into the ether, it is important to obviously reach out.
To address them, yeah.
To address them. From an education point of view, as I said, it was important. This is an audience that is very familiar. I mean, this is an audience that knows how data works. This is an audience that is sensitive to the use of data. Data's king, data's currency. And in our education campaign, I mean, this went with pretty much almost every execution in that March window, was a bunch of explanation around, exactly, the app is, 25 megabytes in the Play Store, for example, or 35 megabytes in the iOS App Store.
It's not big.
Very important. Yeah, I mean, it's a small amount, and very important to actually describe it and to say, that's 4 songs. That's the equivalent of 4 MP3s or 5 MP3s, or and then to create the comparison, for example, with something that people are familiar with. A clip on YouTube is a certain amount of megabytes, and our audio stream, is, for example, 30 megabytes per hour, or 40 megabytes per hour, 20 megabytes per hour, whatever that figure is. It was important for us to actually be very transparent about that, and to create that comparison so people could, make that trade-off and understand that, yes, I'm listening to it, but actually, if I've got a gigabyte bundle, it's hardly going to impact that.
Making a dent, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that we were surprised by, and we kind of had a hunch that it would be the case, but I think most stations would have, in going into lockdown, been quite uncertain about, what would that kind of office-bound listening look like in a home environment.
Right.
And we obviously would extend that lower down. So what would the on-campus listening be like? Plus, what would those young people in their first jobs? I mean, they are listening to us during the day. We can see that. But what would their listening habits be like during lockdown? And certainly, if anything, they listen to us more during lockdown. Obviously, a lot of people had a lot more time on their hands. And we could see certain stuff as well with, for example, the DSTV audio bouquet, where, from a BRC RAM point of view, we're one of the stations with probably one of the highest percentage of listeners that's listening to us on a TV. And that obviously extends our footprint outside of Gauteng. And we got a lot of anecdotal feedback on social media, people, sending us voice notes and stuff, where we could tell that they were listening to us a lot more. On any platform, really.
Okay, that's interesting. Just for your reference, because you're mentioning what is the streaming rate? It's 14 megs per hour. That's what the YFM app stream actually consumes. So, and I think that's interesting. You're taking the educational point of view and not just leaving people in the lurch to go, well, sort it out yourself. There's a lot of apps that run in the background. There's a lot of
updates and all sorts of things, yeah.
Updates happening all the time that people are very, very unaware of. But it is interesting you're saying that, an individual that has only a 64 meg phone, 64 gig phone is not able to keep the number of apps. So it's got to be useful to somebody to keep it on their phone. I think you mentioned it's a currency for sure. What devices are they using though? I mean, the YFM audience in particular.
So, I mean, we've shared some of this data with partners in the OEM space. The split is pretty even in terms of the top 3 platforms being Huawei, Samsung, and Apple. So, across each of those ecosystems, or at least those OEMs, there's a broad range of devices. So, in the Apple ecosystem, for example, you'll see everything from an iPhone 10 all the way back, or an iPhone 10R or 10S. iPhone 11s, you'll see go all the way back to kind of an iPhone 8, iPhone 8 Plus. Similarly, in the Huawei ecosystem, you'll have everything from the latest and greatest devices to kind of those more entry-level smartphone devices. And obviously, in the Samsung world, their device range is enormous. And you will see that across the continuum. So you're pretty much sitting with a split in round numbers, let's call it 30%, 30%, 30%, and then there's kind of a remainder of a bunch of other smaller OEMs.
That's fascinating, though. Is that indicative or completely unique to that audience? Because I'm not sure I've seen it. We traditionally have found that Apple devices, in particular, are always the smallest of the market.
It's difficult to say, but I think, our audience, we always refer to it in this way. Our audience like things. And if they can afford it, even if they can't afford it, they will make a plan to to get the device that they really want, or the pair of sneakers that they really want, or the motor vehicle that they really want. I mean, these are young people. These are young people in an urban environment, in a big city, and the things that they have help define them. It's as simple as that.
Okay. Another question that I've got, and then I see there's quite a few posting questions on the side. You mentioned time spent listening. That was very important to you, that needed to be achieved through this campaign. But what I found very interesting was that you ran it from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. Now, traditionally, major campaigns only run from 6 to 6. Reasons for that? And were you running on weekends?
Not on weekends, so weekdays only. And the thinking was really just to push this through what we would define as our core weekday lineup, which extends all the way to 10 o'clock. After that, we obviously have a number of specialist shows. But yeah, I mean, it was important for us to push this into the evenings. And doing so helped give us insights into what the response rates looked like in those different time bands, obviously. So how does breakfast, for example, compare to drive? How do the two, daytime shows, so brunch and lunch, how do they compare against each other, to each other? And then what does that nighttime picture look like? So it's given us, and, given that we've got 3 weeks of data across 2 campaigns, it's given us some very clear insights into which of those day parts are the most highly engaged.
And which one was it? And I mean, you're competing with television. You're competing with. I mean, we've talked about this. Every device in the home was vying for a listener's attention in some way. So to run it through to 10 p.m., were you still getting the engagement that you really wanted at that time?
Yeah, certainly at night. As you say, you are competing with the kind of TV couch Netflix space, and you would surely tend to see a drop off there. In terms of which of the shows were the most highly engaged, it would be, I mean, almost counterintuitively, probably not your drive time shows. So it was the 2 shows in the middle of the day that as an aggregate, if we look at the 3 weeks, got the most entries. And that, I think, is a function of a bunch of things, given that in June, a large part of the economy was still not open or busy opening. And some of the trends which we would have seen with other campaigns around, that shift in listening, for example, in the mornings, and what that morning peak started to look like during lockdown, what the afternoon peak, I mean, you're not sitting in traffic anymore. So yeah, certainly those 2 middle days, but obviously the drive time show, afternoon drive, would be distorted by the fact that their last show was the final giveaway moment. So, I mean, obviously you would expect to see big spikes in those.
Interesting. Kerry Oliver is just asking, what is the figure on how many people have downloaded the YFM app?
So we're sitting at well over 100,000 downloads, and we tend to grow the amount of people registering on the app on a monthly basis at a higher rate than the amount of downloads. So we're seeing a higher proportion of people actually registering over time, and that's been a very important part of the journey, to make sure that it's not as simple as just download the app and it just becomes. I mean, all of us download apps all day. All week. It's very important for us to close that connection and to make sure that once you've downloaded the app, you register. You give us permission, for example, to send you notifications, and that then reciprocates with you actually sending us a message, and building that relationship with those kind of P1 listeners over time.
But I mean, your RAMS figures, what? 638
over
638,000 on the last one. So to have over 100,000 downloads of the app is, it's a sixth of your audience. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, it is certainly pleasing, and I think a couple of things come into that. Obviously, the younger audience spend their life on these things, so that's very important, and we can see that even in the BRC RAM data, where from a device listening point of view, we're certainly right up there, where more than half the audience listen to us on their phone. Now, these aren't, old Nokia devices that have an FM transmitter in them. These are young people listening to us on streaming via the app. And it's important for us, therefore, to be with them on their most personal device. So that certainly comes into it, the age of the audience. The fact that, as I said, we've been one of the earlier adopters of the platform. So, I mean, this has been a kind of 3-year journey already, possibly even a little bit longer than that. So that certainly helped. And then, these tactical initiatives where we drive downloads and registrations into the base to make sure that, even the P2 or the P3 listener becomes a P1 listener at the end of the day.
Yeah. So let's get back to those large numbers, because that's why we brought you on the webinar today. Is over 1 million entries, and then you've just kind of blitzed me a little bit by going in the presentation that it was over 1.1 million total entries. Now, the biggest promotion I ever ran years ago had over 250,000 total entries. And I think about 117,000 of those were unique. Now, that's a quarter of the total entries that 100 Racks managed. So what was the unique entry count there?
So the over 1.1 is, I guess, deliberate and probably on the slightly low side. It was a little bit above that. From a unique point of view, I mean, we've done some modeling. I mean, on a base this size, it's quite difficult to get to actual numbers.
An actual number, yeah.
But certainly, there were 48 chances to win. So there were 48 unique executions, 48 unique keywords. Obviously, you would see a portion of the base of the audience sending or entering every single one of those. So they would listen, hardcore listener, P1, from, 5 in the morning all the way through to 10 o'clock at night, and make sure that they entered every single one. But our modeling gets to a figure of somewhere around 250,000 unique entries through the 2-week period. And importantly, I mean, you obviously had a continuum, as you would in any competition or promotion of this size, where you would have your what did you call them, Uber P1s, your most highly engaged listener who could enter 300, 400, 500 times across a 3 or 4 hour show. You would have listeners who would pop in and enter once every other show, or once or twice every other show. And then you'd have some listeners who would enter maybe once a day when they were listening. And it was very interesting to see those entries coming through, because you could obviously, across a 3-hour or 4-hour period, actually, see the entries coming through in real time and seeing who that collection of listeners were who were kind of hammering away. And it was important for us as a station, when picking these winners and picking finalists and going through the draw, to obviously be completely random, but to make sure that it was also fair. So to make sure that we picked a selection across that base. So to make sure that we picked people who, maybe did enter once or twice to go into the pot, and to pick people who were, ultra engaged and were sitting every waking moment. And to extend it even further, and I mean, this is where talent became quite important, is because, they would be sitting watching this as well. And they would pick up certain messages that were very honest, very raw, very heartfelt about, the kind of positions that, some of our listeners found themselves in. And it was important for those people to also be included into the draws.
So that's the relationship, that's the connection, and that's what really drives radio. Yeah. But sorry, I've got to go back to that figure again. You're saying it was nearly 250,000 unique, give or take. So a third of your audience were taking part in this promotion.
I wouldn't say it necessarily that high, but I mean, if you had to count the number of times a person sent a unique entry, that would get to that figure. I mean, in terms of actual people, you're probably sitting in the tens of thousands, certainly less than 100,000 that would have actually been engaged, but unique entries, and then obviously the total entry count distorted upwards by by those very engaged people.
Of course. So another question on that. The stations never use WhatsApp, and it's quite contentious. And it changed the landscape of a lot of radio stations in the last 18 months, 2 years. The station obviously uses voice notes for messages, but it's through the app, as you did for this promotion. Do you think the station is disadvantaged by not using WhatsApp? And the same for SMS?
So, yeah, I mean, if we go back into history, the station very seldom used premium SMS. We would use it for promotional campaigns only. The station back then had a position where and took the position where we didn't want to charge the audience a toll to communicate with us. And then on the WhatsApp side of things, I mean, if you rewind, 4 or 5 years ago, the YFM app's been live now for 3 to 4 years. At that point in time, using WhatsApp involved a lot of workarounds or hacks to get messages into the station, to get voice notes into the station, and then obviously to get those on air. Importantly, I mean, we sat and grappled with this years ago. And I think, part of the decision was around making sure that we removed as much on-air clutter as possible. So, I mean, you'll hear this on many stations where there'll be a phone line, a premium SMS line, a WhatsApp line, a Twitter handle, a Facebook handle, an Instagram handle, a TikTok handle. And
follow us on all of these things right now. Yeah,
there's an incredible amount of clutter. And given that we've got a young audience, they know where to find us. We don't have to tell them to find us at YFM on Twitter, which we do from time to time, but, we're there. If they are on Twitter, the likelihood is that they follow us. So, yeah, I mean, that fed into the decision. And as the platform took root, and as our listeners got engaged with the YFM app and started engaging us by sending us messages and voice notes, we actually took a decision, very close to that point in time where we removed calls, so live callers, removing that risk and using the voice note capability in the app, that workflow that's completely seamless. I mean, we see the voice note arrive, we can click, the presenter can click and play that out immediately, using that to our advantage, which obviously makes for far better quality programming.
Okay. That's good to know. Lyndon Johnson says, what has been the retention, the usage of the app post the campaign? Good question.
So, Lyndon, obviously we would have seen a drop off into July. I mean, the peak from 100 racks in June was noticeable. You can see it across all the data. So we're back at a normalized base, but importantly, that normalized base is higher than it would have been, 2 months ago. So it's about, keep growing that base over time, and use these kind of tactical interventions to our advantage.
Okay. Anita Gardini is asking, what advertising opportunities do you have on the app? Can you provide us with audience data of the app users? How many downloads of the app, which we've mentioned just over 100,000? So really the two questions, will there be advertising opportunities on the app? And can you provide us with other audience data?
So Anita, certainly. What we do as a station is, from a campaign point of view, make sure that we design an integrated campaign. So, the station's philosophy is to make sure that, and this potentially is kind of unique in the market where, many other stations, you can go buy digital inventory outright. Whereas our digital inventory is always wrapped up in an on-air campaign, because we believe that the two complement each other very, very well when done right. And it's about finding, the right mechanic to achieve the objective. So from an app point of view, I mean, we would roll that up in a way that makes sense, whether it's a pre-roll ad, so, a short little sting before every live stream, for example, whether it's a billboard that displays on the app on launch, whether it's leveraging the voice note and messaging capabilities, as part of a competition or campaign. It's important for us to deliver that integrated solution. So to not look at the app in isolation, to not look at social in isolation, to not look at the website in isolation, and to not even look at on-air in isolation. And that's certainly what we've been driving at the station for the last 2 years.
Okay. Well, alternatively, Anita can come chat to you and discuss a campaign and how to integrate it. All right, fantastic. Tanya Quinn asks, what would you say the split is between entry-level devices and your upper range from the stats that you've got?
So in broad brushstrokes, I mean, we'd probably look at a 50-50 split. I mean, they're pretty evenly balanced. But, having said that, entry-level devices are, incredibly capable these days. If you look at something like the Huawei Y6P, which launched, I mean, we did a campaign with Huawei in June into July. It's the entry-level Huawei, smart device, and it's got a ridiculous camera system. It's got ridiculous battery life, and these are entry-level devices that are retailing at
ridiculous in a good way, I'm assuming.
Yeah, of course. 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 rand per device, and then obviously on the extreme end, you've got something like the iPhone 11 Pro, which is sitting at 25K.
Yeah.
So you've kind of got that continuum. And while there is certainly, a base of what you would call entry-level devices, certainly on the higher side, I mean, we're constantly surprised when we dig into the data in each of those kind of OEMs, the percentage of devices that are sitting in your classic kind of top of the range space. Okay,
that's very interesting. Hilton, yeah, I mean, from my side, I just think it's been an astonishing piece of promotional work that you guys have done at YFM with this, how you've integrated it from an on-air perspective, and then obviously integrating it with all your digital tools. I think it's an astonishing campaign. I couldn't believe some of the figures that were coming through on a daily basis. And this isn't just to wax lyrical around the fact that it's been done so well, but kudos to you and the team at YFM. I think well done, really, overall.
Thank you.
Just an incredible job, and thanks for sharing the data with us. I don't think there are any other questions that have come through. If I take a quick look, in which case it's really closing this conversation off for you and I today. Thanks very much for the insights. Thank you very much for certainly the transparency with which you've presented all the information. I really appreciate that, Hilton. Head of Digital at YFM. And as he said earlier, if you are looking very much for a converged campaign with their radio station up in Jozi, you chat to Hilton. He'll put you in touch with the right team members, and probably will be at the next meeting explaining how it's all going to come together. So thank you very much time, and thank you very much for joining us today, and we really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks very much, everyone. This will be available as a download a little bit later, and of course you'll be able to check it out on our YouTube channel for a review if you want to at a later stage. Thanks very much, Hilton, and thanks very much for everybody who joined us today. Cheers.